All right, we can probably get started just because it's 5:03. Yes, awesome. Totally feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Thanks all. So our training tonight, as I said, is called Navigating Federal Energy Justice Grants. So this training is being organized by the WEAC TCTAC for EPA Region 2, which serves New York and New Jersey. My name is Jordana Vanderselt, she, her pronouns, and I'm with WEACT, serving as the TCTAC Director of Operations. And in a minute, I will pass it to our presenter, Abhay Ramanan with Clean Energy Group. But I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping slides. If you want to send it to the next slide, please. Awesome. So the meeting tonight is being recorded. We will share the recording and slides after the meeting via email. We'll also post it on our WEACT TCTAC website. Just please keep yourself muted while the presenter is speaking. If you have a question prior to the Q&A portion, feel free to drop it in the chat. We'll have maybe 20 or 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So we'll be answering questions from the chat, but towards the end, we'll also probably just have folks come off mute if they'd like to ask their question that way. And next slide. So just to sort of ground us and this training, Clean Energy Group and WEACT are part of, the EPA's Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center program. So we are a national program working towards holistic government-wide framework for providing technical assistance and capacity building resources to those most in need to improve and foster thriving communities throughout the country. Essentially, there are TCTACs set up all across the country, helping EJ communities, access much needed funding for their projects and issue areas. So the WEACT TCTAC's goals, again, for Region 2, are to build power and knowledge in EJ communities, create or strengthen EJ networks, and really help groups gain access to grant and funding opportunities. So next slide. So we will send these slides out after the webinar, but we've linked in this slide where you can find the TCTAC for your region, because there are 15 regional TCTACs across the country, all helping groups in those areas that I've just mentioned, gaining access to grant funding and putting on trainings like this as well. So I think now we will just pass it to Abby. Yes, Clean Energy Group. So feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you, Jordana. Yes, hello all. My name is Abhay Ramanan. I am a project director with Clean Energy Group. We are a national nonprofit focused on advancing a just transition to clean, reliable, and affordable energy for all. And to provide some context for this training, like I said, we're a national nonprofit. And so all of the information I'm going to be sharing about how to find federal energy grants, how to apply for federal energy grants, is just based on our own personal experience. We are not necessarily experts in these grants beyond like the experiences we've had ourselves. I'm not a lawyer or an accountant. So if you have those like more specific questions, feel free to ask them and I will happily let you know that I don't know the answer to them. And we'll try our best to refer you to folks who can help you with those more specific questions. But this training is really meant to be an overview of what does it mean, how do you find federal energy grants, and then what is kind of the time commitment and the work you might expect to put in to apply for some of the different types of grants. And I'll also link to some resources and technical assistance at the end that will help you with applying for grants. So hopefully this will be really helpful for you all. And like I said, some of these slides are honestly going to be a little dense, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and then at the end, I'm hoping to reserve at least 20 minutes to just speak with you all and answer your questions there. So with that, I can advance my slides. There we go. So yeah, like I said, what this training will cover, how to at least try, there's a lot of information out there, but how to try to stay up to date on what grants are available, the different types of funding that are available and what it takes to apply for those different types, and then supplementary resources and technical assistance that can help you when you're putting together a proposal for federal funding, and then Q&A at the end. So to start out with, how to identify federal funding opportunities, I would say my number one piece of advice is narrow your scope first, because the scale of funding that is available, many are probably aware, through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the IRA and the BIL, there has been a lot of different types of funding that have been rolled out, particularly targeting communities, which is awesome, but it's also can be very overwhelming to try and keep track of all of those. So I would recommend is kind of identifying what your organization or your coalition or whoever is going to focus on, and like what you're trying to get funded. So is it a specific project where you're like, we have this community center that we want to get solar and battery storage for so it can become a resilience hub in the future? Or maybe it's something broader than that, but it's, you want to run a series of community education workshops on solar or on offshore wind or something like that. Figure out what is our expertise going to be? What are we kind of willing to do and work on that's already in our wheelhouse? Do you have a team in place already, or have other organizations that you think would be open to being partners with you on a funding opportunity? And then also, what length of time are you looking for? If you're kind of like, we just want one tranche of funding to cover the purchase of solar and battery storage, that's going to be very different than we're looking for a multi-year federal funding award to cover this initiative over many years, and it's going to have several different iterations of work. And then another thing that can be really helpful, and I know this isn't going to be the case for everyone since you might not know what types of technologies you want to focus on, but what types of clean energy technologies are you particularly interested in? So there's a lot of funding around solar. So it might even be, maybe you want to consider community solar and building a larger array that can benefit your community, or maybe you're interested in like I was saying, that solar and a battery storage system for your particular facility. So that can help you narrow it down. And like I said, you don't necessarily need to figure all of that out at once. And, folks at things like the TCTAC can help you figure out what might be best to approach in terms of technologies. But that can be really helpful because once you've narrowed your scope, the best thing to do is to start signing up for newsletters. So the DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, or EERE, they love their acronyms. That is the biggest office for releasing kind of regular funding opportunities for renewable energy out there. It's not the only office. If you're interested in, for example, I'll bring up this proposal a lot because it's the last proposal I worked on most recently, even though we weren't awarded it, so it might be bad news to be using that as an example, but CAG, for example, we're interested in doing community education around hydrogen. So I also subscribe to the DOE's Hydrogen Fuel Cell Technology Office. But like I said, most of you are probably going to be interested in EERE. They have a funding listserv that you can sign up for. And like I said, you'll be getting these slides, and I've linked to everything throughout. So you'll be able to just click on that and get taken to the funding listserv. But every DOE office has a similar listserv. So if you were like me are interested in doing like community education around hydrogen, you can sign up for the Hydrogen Fuel Cell and Technology Office listserv. And if you're not really sure which office you think would make the most sense to follow, I know the folks at WEACT are talking to DOE about potentially doing a training for the TCTAC that kind of gets into all the different offices at DOE and what they all do. So highly recommend you sign up to get the TCTAC training emails if you don't already, and keep your eye out for that. And then I also did link to a list that just provides all federal funding and technical assistance opportunities that are targeting community organizations below, and that's across both all of DOE and also other agencies like U.S. Department of Agriculture. So that's a very broad list. And like I said, it might be easier for you to just narrow your scope and figure out, maybe you just want to sign up for EERE newsletter or like the Solar Technology Office newsletter or something like that. So you're kind of already narrowing your scope a little bit and knowing like, we just want to focus on solar funding opportunities. Once you sign up for the newsletters, a step that is going to be really, you'll have to do before you apply for anything anyway, is to create an account on what's called the EERE exchange. And this is how you apply for pretty much any federal funding opportunity that is, done through EERE and there's a larger award. You need to actually create a separate account before you even sign up for EERE because the government loves multiple steps. So to sign up for EERE, you need to create what's called a login.gov account. And for that, it does require two-factor authentication. So you will need access to a cell phone or a smartphone to sign up for that, which is, again, kind of annoying. I think there might be like an email option potentially, but it is pretty much easiest if you have a cell phone or a smartphone when you're signing up for login.gov. Once you sign up for login.gov, then you sign up for EERE Exchange. And I will say, once you signed up for EERE Exchange, that can also be another way to keep track of funding opportunities because they do post all of the funding opportunities or notifications of intent to create an opportunity on EER Exchange as well. So you can just check that regularly if you don't want to sign up for a newsletter or something like that. So once you've kind of figured out that, you got one office or one type of funding that you're looking for, there are still different types of funding opportunities that are available under each office. So the bigger awards that are typically multi-year projects for larger amounts that are kind of what you might envision as like a typical like federal grant application are all under the umbrella of research, development, and demonstration funding. So these are open competitive solicitations, and because they tend to be larger, there's always what's called either a notice of intent, or sometimes they'll do a request for information, an RFI, before even announcing the funding opportunity. And so that notice of intent is a document that says, we're planning to release this amount of funding. Here are kind of the different topic areas we're looking for, the different types of projects we're looking for. Here's the amount of funding you can apply for, and then here's kind of a general timeline of when we anticipate releasing the full funding opportunity announcement. So you can't apply for anything with the NOI. It's just to tell you that they're going to be doing that, and then you can kind of start getting, your project team together, or just, figuring out if you want to apply for it. And then you'll be kind of ready when the federal opportunity announcement is actually announced. So these projects, they do have a lot of downsides. I mean, they also have plus sides, the plus side being that it's more money and it tends to be for longer duration. But they do typically have a cost share requirement for research and development projects. And so those are more targeted towards, research-based projects where you're answering some sort of qualitative question or quantitative question, have a 20% cost share, and then the demonstration projects, which is typically more for building, like a solar project, building a battery storage project, have a 50% cost share. That requirement is usually waived for nonprofit entities, state agencies or municipalities, and tribes. But you have to just be sure to really carefully read the notice of intent to make sure that they have a category that applies for those applicants in particular that says that there is no cost share. The nice thing about research, development, and demonstration funding, it is a much more labor-intensive application, but you do have to submit a concept paper before you fully apply. So they kind of save you the labor a little bit because the concept paper is a lighter lift And once you submit that, you're either encouraged to submit a full application or discouraged. So you don't have to, go through the work of putting together a full proposal and then just be, shut down and you wasted a lot more time. The timeline for these awards, again, because it's more money, can be a lot longer for kind of going from application to actually receiving your first tranche of funding. It's usually 9 to 12 months. I would say 12 months is a good kind of guesstimate from when you get that first notice of intent to getting your first tranche of funding. It's safe to estimate about 12 months. But I would honestly just pad your timelines, because DOE can be a very slow moving force when they want to be, particularly when it comes to contracting and negotiating and actually getting the funding awarded. So I covered, those larger funding opportunities, the research development demonstration opportunities. What's also nice is there's a newer type of opportunity called prizes and competitions. So this is a newer type of competitive solicitation that is meant to cut down on the burden of applying for and managing those larger multi-year grants. They're usually for a smaller amount. I would say they're most of the time under 100,000. It can vary depending on the prize or the competition, but they're generally in the like $25,000 to $50,000 range. And they're usually kind of a one-time award. So these are often very good for if you have like a project in mind already, like a community solar project or a solar and storage project. These are helpful for, you can kind of submit your application and then you get the one-time award to develop the project. And because of that, you only need to submit one full application. There's no concept paper needed. And the timeline is a lot shorter, which is nice. It's typically around 6 months from when they open the competition to when you receive your tranche of funding. And there's just a shorter like negotiation period and things like that, because you're just kind of getting the one-time award. And I've linked to some examples of those awards below. Unfortunately, to keep up with prizes and competitions, you kind of need to register for a different website, which is the American Made Challenges website. And that's where most of these are listed regularly, but also a lot of DOE agencies will also send out emails when they have a new prize or competition, like the Community Power Accelerator. Usually DOE's Solar Technologies Office will send out an announcement about that as well. So in terms of the application process, we're going to cover research, development, and demonstration funding first, because that takes the longest to do and is probably the most arduous. So for that, before you apply, some of the first things you need is you'll need to create a sam.gov account and create what's called a unique entity ID, or UEI number. If this already you're like, I don't know what any of that means, I highly recommend one of our TCTAC partners, the Environmental Protection Network, does regular sam.gov office hours where they'll walk you through that whole process and help you create an account and all of that. And I've linked to that below. There are, I think, every Wednesday. So highly recommend you sign up for those to walk through the sam.gov process. And then, like I mentioned earlier, you need to then create an account on login.gov and use that to create an account on EERE Exchange. One thing I will say about finding project partners for if you're interested in applying for one of these larger awards, if you already have folks in mind, that's great. If you don't, or if you have some folks but not a full project team, or you feel like you're missing someone to do one aspect of the work you're interested in, most funding opportunity announcements will have what's called like a project partner teaming list, where you can advertise like, we're looking for a university to partner with or something like that. Or other teams will also advertise, we're looking for a community-based organization or something like that. So you can find partners that way as well. You don't necessarily need to find all of your project partners yourself. So you've got kind of all of your different logins set up and all your different accounts set up for before you apply. and are interested in starting the application process. So the initial application process, there's a few different ways this can go depending on the funding opportunity announcement, which is again why it's really important to read that initial notice of intent document really carefully. Some NOIs will require what's called a letter of intent or LOI. It's not always required, but when it is, it's usually just like a very brief form that you can fill out directly on EERE Exchange under each kind of funding opportunity. And it's like a 200-word description of the project. Who are your project partners going to be? What's your anticipated funding ask? So it's a pretty short overview, but it's just kind of saying that you intend to apply for the full application. If the NOI requires a letter of intent, you won't be able to submit a full application unless you submitted that letter of intent, which is why it is important to read the NOI very carefully to make sure if you need to submit an LOI, you do that ahead of time so that you're not kind of going to submit a full application and realize that you can't because you didn't submit a letter of intent. All right, so we now get to the concept paper stage of the initial application process. So like I said, the intention of this is to reduce the amount of time you spend on submitting a full application if your original concept is just, for whatever reason, not what DOE is looking for. Usually the things that it includes are, just a project title, the topic of the funding opportunity announcement that is being addressed. So typically the way a funding opportunity announcement is structured is it will kind of have several different topic areas under the umbrella of the announcement. So for example, with this hydrogen proposal that I put together a few months ago, there was 5 different topic areas. That was, one on just more technical, like demonstration projects, one that was more targeted towards research, and then the one that we applied for was around community engagement and education. So that is something you have to cover in the concept paper is, we intend to address work under topic area 5. Your technical and business points of contact at the organization that's leading the application process, the names of all of the organizations that are on the project team, and this can be changed later. So this is your concept paper. So if you end up adding another partner to your project team, that's totally fine. And you don't need to stick to who you've listed on the original concept paper. But I will note that, DOE is going to be encouraging or discouraging your project based on what you put in this concept paper. So if you include a project partner who's going to be doing, kind of a key piece of the work, and then they, end up not being on your full proposal, that might change, the outcome of your application. Key personnel at each organization. So these are going to be the staff who are doing most of the work. You don't need to list kind of support staff like your office administrator if they're not going to be doing work directly related to the project, but you do need, generally just like 2 or 3 of the staff who are going to be doing most of the work around this proposal. A general budget, which includes the total amount you plan to ask for. And again, this can be changed for your full proposal. If you think you either under asked or over asked, you can adjust that amount later. And a breakdown of funding per budget period. So usually these awards are for multiple years. So you'll have at least 2 budget periods, sometimes more than that. And the breakdown of budget periods can either just be, 1 budget period equals 1 year, or if your work kind of naturally breaks down into different stages, you can kind of structure the budget periods that way. For example, again, with this hydrogen proposal, we had a lot more money that we're asking for in budget period 1 because we were planning to do community workshops, which would cost more money, and then less in budget period 2 because we were only going to be doing more like research and writing, and that would have cost less. And then the biggest piece of work around the concept paper is a 3-page technical description. So this includes just what your project intends to do, what they call the current state of the field. So this is, for, again, this hydrogen proposal, we talked about what other community engagement and education was out there around hydrogen, which there isn't really a whole lot of, so it was a pretty short description. And then what our project would bring to the field. So we're addressing this gap in the current state of the art. So this concept paper, I would say it takes around 40 hours of staff time. That's not, I don't want to scare anyone by being like, oh, that's like, a full week of my time. That is kind of factoring in via project partners. They'll probably take some of their time. Whoever is helping you with like getting a budget together, things like that. But I would say it's safe to estimate about 40 hours. So, that's something to consider. And so that concept paper, once it's ready to go, it, again, is submitted on EERE Exchange. So once you submit the concept paper, you will usually get a encouraged or discouraged response from DOE. I would say within about 60 days. It can, sometimes it'll be sooner than that, and they will typically list a timeline for that in the FOA. But also they don't always stick to those timelines. So I would say 60 days is a good kind of benchmark. So once you get that, if you are encouraged, you will usually have about 30 days from the notification to then submit a full application. So that does require a lot more documentation. You'll need what's called an application for federal assistance, or an SF-424 form. This is fairly straightforward. Well, it's a list of kind of the current funding that your organization has, and kind of a list of what you'll, kind of a line item budget for what you'll be asking for. So that will supplement your budget justification. And all of these templates will be shared with you when you are filling out the application. So you won't have to build it from scratch. But the budget justification is, again, building out, your like hourly staff time. So for those key personnel, how much of their, how much of that, the money that you're asking for, is broken down into the staff. Your overhead, you'll need a justification for that overhead expense. So, this can often just be a form listing out, here's our like cost of our benefits, here's cost of our administrative staff, and this percentage of our overhead is then going into this budget that we're applying for with this federal funding that will support it. That budget justification will also include just costs of the actual work you intend to do. So any kind of contractors you might hire, like a graphic designer, or like I said, with these workshops, we're planning to give honorariums, and so we factored that in, the costs of the venues, things like that. So that all needs to be listed out. A disclosure of lobbying activities, an SFLLL form. And this needs to be filled out for every one of those key personnel you listed. So this is also why I recommend only doing kind of 2 or 3 key personnel per organization, since you need to fill it out for each of them. And so that is a disclosure of all of the different funding sources that go into each staff person's salary. So for example, I work for a nonprofit. We're primarily foundation funded. So for my SFLL, I had to fill out a form for each share of the different grants that I work on. So my time is paid for by several different grants, and I had to list that out for each of them, and then sign it at the bottom saying, this is how my salary is paid, essentially. So that can sometimes be very labor intensive if you have, if you're a nonprofit that is foundation funded like us, and you have a lot of different funding sources that are covering your staff's time. So that's just something to consider when you're figuring out who's going to be key personnel that's listed on your application. And then those are kind of the more administrative forms that need to be filled out. You then need to fill out a technical volume and what's called a statement of project objectives. So The good thing is you can take a lot of the stuff you put together for your concept paper and reuse that in these in the technical volume and the statement of project objectives. The statement of project objectives, or the SOPO as it's called, if your application is awarded, you will use your SOPO when you're going into negotiations with DOE, because it's how you list out what your project intends to accomplish in each budget period. So it's typically a breakdown of kind of the different things you intend to do per budget period. So for, again, this hydrogen proposal, we kind of had budget period 1, and then we're going to do outreach to communities and kind of our objectives under that, and a timeline of when we intended to accomplish those objectives. And then we had our second action item was, developing a curriculum for these workshops. So, different objectives for achieving that and a timeline and so on and so forth. And it's essentially to show how you intend to accomplish your goals in the amount of time that you've allotted yourself and with the budget that you've asked for. The technical volume is very similar to what you've already submitted in the concept paper. It's more talking about how your project will innovate or change the state of the field. Unfortunately, a lot of DOE, the forms that are required are really structured around more technical projects. So they're kind of assuming like you're doing like a research experiment. And a lot of the times it doesn't quite work for, we're planning to build a solar project. It's not necessarily like super innovative, but you kind of have to talk about it in the way of, it is innovative in the sense that we've never built a solar project in this community before, or, community solar that supports, specific nonprofit that provides these community benefits that's never been done before. So again, you'll have templates for all of these. And like I said, you will have plenty of technical assistance that you can take advantage of to help you figure out what to include in this. But yeah, like I said, it is definitely a lot more labor intensive. And I would anticipate about 120 hours of staff time. Again, that's not assuming, I hope that you're not going to be doing this all by yourself. So it's not like 3 hours or 3 weeks of one person working just nonstop. That's kind of incorporating your project partners and any office staff and things like that. So I have talked about project partners a lot, so I did just want to cover some considerations for your project partners. You don't need to have them all listed when you're submitting a concept paper, but one thing that is that some FOAs will have specific project team requirements. So sometimes they'll say only nonprofits can apply for funding under this topic area, or the lead organization must be a municipality or like a tribal entity. So again, just be sure to read those things really carefully. And that doesn't necessarily mean you can't apply, but you might need to have a different organization be the lead organization who's actually submitting the application. Now I'll get into subrecipients and subcontractors. So each FOA will, like I said, list requirements for lead organizations. They'll also often list requirements for subrecipients. And these are going to be different than subcontractors, which can get very confusing. But a subrecipient is generally someone who's or an organization that's expected to be a project partner throughout the duration of the project. So they're going to be with you kind of throughout all of it and be working on different pieces of work throughout that time that you'll have the funding. Because of that, because they tend to be, getting a larger share of the funding, they have more requirements. So a subrecipient needs to submit a letter of intent or commitment, which is just a document kind of, can be on their letterhead, and it's kind of just saying, we are, signing up to work on this project, and we are going to be doing, here's a bulleted list of all the activities we're going to be doing. Here's, why we're interested in doing it. And then it's signed by the staff person. They'll need to submit their own budget justification, again, covering personnel, overhead, travel, their own SFLL form for all their key personnel that are listed. So again, if they've listed 2 or 3 staff people, each staff person needs to fill out an SFLL. resumes for those staff people, and then a current pending support form that lists all of their current all their current funding. So any activities, awards, or other federal funding that they've already received. So those are subrecipients. Subcontractors, there's fewer requirements, and part of that is because the expectation is they're only going to be doing a discrete piece of work. So they might be like a graphic designer or someone who's going to be only working on like workshops or something like that and won't be with you for the full duration of the project. It is better if you list those folks when you're submitting the application rather than after the fact, because if they're going to be allocated a specific amount of funding, it's just better to get them, get all the documentation input to DOE ahead of time. But like I said, they have fewer requirements, so they just need a letter of commitment, a list of the key personnel, and resumes for the key personnel, but they don't have to fill out an SFLL form. And then just the estimated hours that each of those key personnel are going to be working on the project. All right, so once you've kind of done all that work and submitted the application, the FOA will list a timeline for when you're expected to hear back. And you generally will get reviewer comments on your submission within 2 months of your application being submitted. So, typically the process is DOE gets all the applications. They will have reached out ahead of time to external reviewers. They're usually not within that DOE office. They can often be folks from like nonprofits like Clean Energy Group. And those reviewers will review a set number of applications, provide comments on the application, and then you will receive a notification and have about a week to respond to those reviewer comments. And sometimes they might not have a lot of comments that you need to respond to. But I will say the reviewer comments, even if they are overwhelmingly positive, it's not always a guarantee that your application is awarded, because that final determination, DOE will take all of those comments into consideration, but they have final discretion on whether or not your application is awarded. So that was applying for research, demonstration, and development funding. Now applying for prizes and competitions is a much simpler process. Again, the process kind of varies depending on the different award types or categories. The nice thing about these is since they're kind of, there's fewer of them, there's generally like an informational webinar of what you need to apply. So they'll kind of walk you through the process a little bit. But I shared some example requirements from a recent prize, which was the Community Power Accelerator. So you just need to share. For this is targeting community solar projects in particular. And it's really just, here's a description of our project. Here's how we're kind of meeting, these community benefit requirements that the Community Power Accelerator wants. And here's how we plan to use this funding to expand this community solar project. And the timeline for this is also a lot shorter. You'll usually submit your application and then you'll hear back around 60 days after the deadline to apply, with whether or not you were awarded. So that kind of covers the initial application process for federal grants. Like I said, there are a lot of available supports for getting through this process. A few that I've mentioned here, I know I didn't completely address like specific funding opportunities. So for example, Solar for All. So I did want to link to a Solar for All briefing for community organizations that is very helpful. I could be here all day if I covered each specific funding opportunity. So this is really just meant to be an overview. Also, I linked to a directory for just solar technical assistance for community-based organizations that, again, can be really helpful. If you're specifically interested in community solar, I highly recommend the National Community Solar Partnership. They have a great technical assistance program that can help you figure out, what your project looks like before you even apply for any funding. We at Clean Energy Group have a pre-development technical assistance fund, and this is specific for solar and storage projects. But if you are thinking about solar and storage and want to know like what it would cost to develop a project on your facility, what it could actually look like and sizing and all of that, we have technical assistance available to cover all of that. So you can then go out and seek funding. And you can also always just reach out directly through the TCTAC for technical assistance, and we'll do our best to connect you with someone who can help. So with that, hopefully this was helpful to you all, and I would love to hear some questions from all of you, or I'll can take a look at the chat and answer any questions there. And I will stop sharing my screen so I can see faces, hopefully.
Yeah, so we're such a small crew. If anyone has questions, just feel free to ask. I was looking at, Abby, some of the questions that we got in advance, but it really, I think you covered a lot of them. The very last one that you mentioned at the end was like specific funding opportunities for solar or community-based climate resiliency work. But yeah, you mentioned solar for all. Is there anything else that's currently available?
Yeah, I'll just say specific for Solar for All. That briefing that I linked to also includes a link to what each state is doing. So I highly recommend you go through that to figure out what your state is going to be rolling out for Solar for All, because it lists all of their plans. And so again, for like things like climate resiliency, that can be a really helpful way to just know like what is coming down the pike, since the Solar for All stuff can be very overwhelming if you try and like find individual things.
That's true. I've found it overwhelming, and maybe I've not been like looking in the right place. But so it's the link that you were talking about. Is that on the last slide? We'll send it out after.
Yeah, so that is the Solar for All briefing for community organizations. The first resource I linked to on that last slide.
Awesome. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions?
And if you have like a specific project you're trying to find funding for, or a specific opportunity you're interested in, we're happy to try and help answer questions about it. I might not know the answer to your question, but I will do my best. Katie?
Hi, thank you both so much for organizing this, and thank you for your talk. It's really informative. So I am with Berkeley Air Monitoring Group, and we specialize in household energy projects, specifically in the context of cooking appliances. So we work with projects that have to do often with some kind of cook stove transition study. So in the US, more recently, we have taken on more domestic projects. So it's usually gas to electric, but we also work in a lot of LMICs where it's usually biomass to gas is considered the cleaner alternative. And so at the heart of our projects, I feel like we have this environmental justice, like in its essence, that's what we're trying to accomplish, but we are trying to get more involved with specific funding opportunities in EJ. So I was wondering, I mean, the DOE's, what was it, EERE sounds like a good jumping off place for us. I didn't know if you had any other kind of specific recommendations for our line of work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say at Clean Energy Group, we don't do as much on like home like electrification, so I might not be the best person to answer that, but I would say, yeah, I think EERE is a great place to start. I'm sure that I know there are like some like home decarbonization funding opportunities out there. And then I'm assuming you're looking at groups in California?
Yes, well, we're not just limited to California. Like I said, historically with our company, we've actually done more work in LMICs, so very globally focused, but recently we have taken on more projects in the US. yeah, they tend to be California. There's a lot of opportunity there and funding, but we've also done a couple of projects in New York as well.
Okay, yeah, I would say also looking at like the state agencies, I know like California has a lot of EJ specific resources, and same with like the New York, NYSERDA, the New York Research and Development Authority, has actually, I think I linked to their technical assistance program, but they have some good programs that are like state specific, and some of that, again, like the Solar for All funding, they will be rolling out like federal grant opportunities as well through the states, but that might also be a good place to start, is like region specific funding.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great idea.
Any other questions? If not, you can always email us if you think about something. Oh, Abby, could you pop up that last slide, by the way?
Yeah.
Because if you all, if anyone thinks of anything later tonight or tomorrow, there are easy ways to get in touch with us. So here's, how you would contact the WEAC TCTAC. There's our email. If you also just want to get in touch with Abby and ask a follow-up question, you can reach out to that email and we'll totally direct it to her, and anyone else at Clean Energy Group. Oh, Maggie, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, sorry to jump into the last minute
Oh,
question.
perfect.
Yeah, I had a quick question about, I'm pretty new to all of the federal funding landscape in the United States. I was based in Canada for a long time, but I'm curious, like, with all of this information that you shared, like, how dependent is it on changes to, like, is this information reviewed every year and it becomes different? Are there slight changes that we can expect every, like, election cycle, or like, yeah, just in terms of the information that you're sharing today, like its relevancy going forward, or if there's like specific periods of change and renewal that we should be keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I'm sure all of us are I don't know if anticipating is the right word with the election, but so it kind of depends on the funding opportunity. A lot of the stuff that came through IRA or BIL, well, particularly through BIL, is multi-year, and a lot of that has already been allocated, so it is unlikely it will completely dry up. It might, be reduced depending on like an administration change. Similarly with IRA funding, a lot of that is already allocated for multiple years, but it might just change a little bit depending on administration changes, or it can also depend on state changes as well. Depending on if there's an administration change in a state, they might just shift priorities, and some of this funding, even if it is federally allocated, it is up to the state's discretion of what they're actually using it for. So I would say most of it is accurate, particularly just like, how to hear about funding opportunities and all of that. But some of it, like amounts and like priorities, might change over time.
Thank you, that's helpful.
That was a good explanation, Abby. I also just dropped in the chat. We did just recently have a previous TCTAC training on understanding EJ laws and policies, where some of our partners at NYU went through sort of like what to expect if a new, I'm blanking, but if a new president comes in, or what could not be sort of taken back from what's already been accomplished at the federal level. But you can totally check out that recording. I think we have slides available on that weact.org/TCTAC website as well. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Again, all of our contact is on the screen. We do have a feedback survey. That is the QR code on the left. But I will send out a follow-up email. Thank you, Casey. Slides available here. I'll send out a follow-up email to all who attended, just to see if anyone is again interested in completing the feedback survey. And then, linking everyone to where you can find upcoming trainings that we're holding. We do just serve New York and New Jersey in terms of one-on-one TA, but our webinars are open to anyone across the country. So we're super, grateful that folks joined in from the West Coast and wherever else you may be. But thank you all and have a good evening.
Thanks all.